Hi, my name is Carl Rosenthal, and thank you for joining me on the Next Up 70-534 Architecting Microsoft Azure Solutions video. This is video number 2. You'll notice that I've kind of started naming them video number 2 as opposed to week 1 or week 2 and that sort of thing. And the reason being because we're going to try and kind of get ahead with regards to when the release cycle is, just to kind of make sure everyone's across different topics. So expect that these will come out more regularly than what they have in the past. Um, so a little bit of housekeeping to start off with, and then also they're going to dive into some of our topics. So securing the resources and designing application storage and data access strategy. So first off, essentially with our housekeeping, the main thing is just to make sure you are keeping on going, right? So make sure you keep on going through the readings, the links. I'll post all the links from the PowerPoint deck that I've got showing today. I'll post those so you've got those to continue with as well. If there's something you come across that's really useful, make sure you post that into Yammer as well. Essentially, you just want to keep on progressing through so that they're not getting to the point where you're getting to the day before the exam and going, oh my goodness, I've got nothing, or I haven't done any study or anything like that. So and don't necessarily wait for a topic to be discussed through one of the videos. Start working your way through. If you go through the video like the last video, you'll know that what topics are actually coming up, and also through the objective domain that's been published into Yammer. Make sure you ask questions in Yammer as well. So if there's something that you're studying and you go, this doesn't make sense, it's not clear, then make sure you participate into there. As I mentioned in the previous video, and we've mentioned in multiple posts across Yammer as well, is that the other thing to bear in mind is that definitely you should be across PowerShell, which kind of maybe seems a bit unfair because it's the design and architecting exam, but you certainly need to be aware of how to perform some of these tasks in PowerShell. Okay, so what are we looking at in today's video? So we've got two topics we're going to dive into today: securing resources, which is 20 to 25% of the exam, and then design application storage and data access strategy, and again, that's 5 to 10%. Now, remembering what we said in the last video is that basically those numbers give you the ability to kind of focus. So focus on what you need to be studying and what you need to be looking at. So the higher the amount of resources, then that means that's effectively how many questions you're going to get out of the pool is across that percentage. So 20 to 25% of the questions are going to be on securing resources. So let's dive into that as a topic, and you can see that in there's multiple sort of like subtopics as such within there. Essentially, again, what we're looking at is designing, right? We're looking at, but in getting to that point, you need to know what the infrastructure is that sits behind it and how it sits together. Now, if that's the case, you need to now know securing resources, so what the different identities, different types of identities are. So managed identities, hybrid identities, identity providers, and then also what's an appropriate data security solution, so how that kind of holds together, and designing a role-based access control strategy and some of the subtopics within there, and then managing security risks and what the different topics are, what the different solutions are that are available. So the idea of this is that what you're going to be doing, again, is not necessarily implementation, but you need to know the overall theory behind these and what the different types of security resources are that are available to you. So securing resources using managed identities. So let's dive into those sort of subtopics in there. So first off, describing the differences between Active Directory on-premise and Azure Active Directory. Obviously, the main difference in here is just where the authentication is located. But it is also a different type of authentication as well. So if we're doing on-premise AD, this is the same AD that you've had forever and a day, living on a domain controller on-premise. Uses Kerberos authentication to be able to do your access, and then the users get given a token to be able to then go and access different resources after that. If using Azure AD, so Azure Active Directory, then it's a service. It's a service that's provided. So there's no domain controller as such. The the authorization process is OAuth, and the resources that you're going to be accessing by default are then going to be cloud cloud resources, and therefore your authentication is into the cloud. Just bear in mind that you also need to be aware of what the different types of Active Directory, Azure Active Directory are. So there's different editions of that. So there's basic versus premium features, so that you can then have a decision point as to which one you need to put in include in your design. The next topic, programmatically accessing Azure AD using using the Graph API. So the Graph API gives access for Azure AD using OData REST API endpoints. And effectively what that does is that gives applications the ability to be able to create, read, update, and delete, or as it's also known, CRUD, if you're looking for a way to remember that, objects and resources that live in Azure AD. So it does give then, an outside application the ability to be able to do a lot of that sort of initiation and management. Secure access to resources from Azure AD applications using OAuth and OpenID Connect. So there's a couple of different ways for this to be able to work. So first off, Azure AD uses the OAuth 2.0 to enable access, and what that will give us access to is to web applications, web APIs. In order for that to work, you need to register the application with Azure AD first, and then as part of that process, there's then effectively a key that gets registered into the application, and then Azure AD knows about it. So then there's calls that can go back and forth for the authorization process. Okay. Then what the OID the OpenID Connect gives is that actually gives you an extension on top of the OAuth 2.0. What that does is that then gives goes one step further from the authorization to from the authentication to the authorization, and essentially, like, it's used for circumstances where you have applications that are server hosted but browser accessed. So make sure that you're, which one is the appropriate solution for the for particular implementations, that you make sure you're aware of that. Securing resources using hybrid identities. So this is when we're going to have something that lives on-prem. This is when we're going to have something that lives in the cloud. So how are we going to manage that process? How are we going to make sure that we can do the connection between those two, between resources? So with SAML, Azure AD uses SAML 2.0 to enable single sign-on for users. Now that single sign-on to be able to then get access to cloud resources, but it also can be used to get access to on-prem resources. If we're doing on-prem resources, then we need to have some way for that SAML token to be able to, or SAML claim, sorry, to be able to then come back on premise, and that's by using something like ADFS to be able to put into place. Now, this is an important sort of concept, right? Is that by default, if we've got on-premise AD and we've got cloud AD, so traditional AD versus Azure AD, that in order to be able to have those talk to each other, there's a couple of different steps that we need to have put into place. There's a couple of sort of technologies as such. Now we can get around it by doing what we call by using the AD Connect to be able to perform synchronization. And what that does is that'll actually synchronize between the on-premise Azure into the cloud. Now, what that does is it gives us the ability to be able to have a single username and password, but it is not single sign-on. So it's a bit of a gray area from the user perspective. The user kind of sees that it's the same username and password, and therefore they go, oh, it's single sign-on. And the answer is it's not, because they have to sign on potentially twice. They have to sign on to cloud resources and sign on to on-premise resources. Because if we're not doing something to be able to connect those two together, if we're just simply doing a synchronization, then it means that if something gets changed on premise, we synchronize that out into the cloud. And that's what the Azure AD Connect does for us. Okay. The way that we can do true single sign-on, so then giving the ability to be able to sign on once, either on premise or into the cloud, and then have that transport back and forth, is to use ADFS. Now, with ADFS, it then means that if a user, say for instance, a user has logged on to an on-premise resource, so open up their laptop, logged on to the domain, then they're automatically then going to get access via the claim to resources that live in Azure. Now, that Azure those identities as well may not necessarily be living directly into Azure, so the applications we're going to may not be living in Azure directly, because bear in mind that we can then use Azure AD to be able to provide, once we're in the cloud, single sign-on into cloud resources, so other sort of third-party resources that live outside of Microsoft as well. But it's important to make sure that we're aware of those building blocks, right? So we've got on-premise authentication, we've got cloud authentication, and the two don't meet unless we first off synchronize, which is our Azure synchronization, so using AD Connect. That gives us the single identity to be able to use across. But the single sign-on comes from technology such as ADFS. We also have the ability to be able to do secure resources from other identity providers by using other identity providers. So we can give access to applications that are providers such as Microsoft account, Twitter, Facebook, Google, and then at that point, those applications can then also be using things like, for instance, Azure AD. So that at the end of the day, Azure AD is the base one that everyone gets. So it's, if you want to be able to use that, use a resource that lives in Azure to be able to take the authentication process from, say, for instance, Google or Facebook or Twitter or Yahoo, to be able to then extend out where authentication is. So sign on once into one of those other cloud resources, but then extend access into the resources in Azure. We can also use AAD B2C. So with Azure Active Directory B2C, essentially what that does is it gives you the ability to be able to have a tenant, which we can then use protocol messages from applications to go through OAuth 2.0 or the OpenID Connect. And if we're using those, then it's a nice, easy way to be able to connect because that's already included within Azure AD. Otherwise, we can also use the supplied libraries. So there's additional libraries you can use to be able to use other, like, if you've got outside identity providers you want to be able to synchronize to as well. So you're kind of not stuck with one or the other. You can use multiple sort of ways to be able to do the authentication. But essentially what this does is this gives you the ability to be able to have a consumer-facing web and mobile application, or web or mobile application, that you don't have to keep on managing the external identities for. Instead, you can just do hooks into existing identities. We also have the ability to be able to do Azure AD B2B. Now, with the B2B, essentially it means we've got partner-managed identities, but giving those partner-managed identities the ability to be able to access your corporate applications. Now, the bonus with this is that the partner themselves manage the identities, so they don't set up who can log on, but you manage the applications and the access, and you can revoke those at any time. So it means that, say, for instance, when if you want to so it means that you don't have to manage what the outside what the outside identities are in any way. You're just simply effectively reaching out or getting them to do the authentication at the partner end, and then passing through a token that we can then use for access to the applications. The next topic is for identifying an appropriate data security solution. And again, this is a really big topic to be able to, for reading purposes, right? For things that you need to be able to look at. So the basic sort of things for identifying security requirements for data in transit and in rest. So what's the things that you need to be able to include in your design? Now, identifying those is then going to leverage off what you can do within Azure to make sure that Azure is actually going to meet those requirements, and then implementing the data security requirements for using Azure services, so all the various sort of services around storage encryption, disk encryption, SQL database, etc. Okay. So first off, like for the security requirements, the main thing is that you've got to have a really good understanding on overall what the security is that's available for data, whether it's in transit or whether it's in rest in Azure. So basically, as I said, this is a big topic to kind of to work your way through, but it is really just a bunch of factual topics, right? So therefore, looking at what Azure can supply for data that's in transit, so that's data that's being copied to and fro, or data that sits on a disk somewhere. The data in transit, end-to-end encryption, they're making sure that the networks are secured, making sure that if you're going from on-premise into the cloud, VPNs, that sort of thing. Otherwise, the data at rest is when it sits on storage. What sort of encryption can we do within storage? Say for instance, if we've got storage so we can encrypt a storage account. What's the limitations on that? So if you're doing, say, for instance, you're migrating from a classic storage account into a resource manager storage account, then just bear in mind that you can't encrypt that. If you are doing an encryption of a disk, a VHD, which is coming from VM, which is out of the marketplace, then the disk itself, in that case, the base disk, is not encrypted, but any of the writes that you perform to it are encrypted. So, essentially making sure that you defining that you need to identify security requirements is that's a very airy fairy topic. Instead, what you need to do is you need to concentrate on what Azure can supply, so that you then know what requirements you can actually supply using Azure based off, say, for instance, a case study you provide. And again, implementing data security requirements for services. Again, this is like looking at what sort of requirements you've got is going to be based off what sort of requirements are, or what's available for you to be able to do within Azure. So you need to make sure that you are okay with being able to talk to those various different topics. The other thing that you need to look out for is role-based authentication. And so with RBAC, essentially what this is then how you make sure that only the people that you want to have access to a particular resource are the ones that actually have access to it. So again, the topics that we're looking at within here, resource scopes, what the different resource scopes are, and then how do we define into there? So therefore, when you're doing your design, what level you can apply to, what the standard roles are, and then what custom roles you might put into place. So for securing resource scopes, such as the ability to create VMs on Azure Web Apps. So the main thing is this: you start from the same sort of approach you would do with normal design, right? So least privilege principle. Make sure that you approach from that perspective. That essentially you're not giving resources up front that you want to be able to remove later on. You can then implement that using the fine-grained access management using RBAC, so using the role-based access control. And RBAC can be applied at multiple levels. And again, make sure that we're okay with that, with the different levels that we can put it into. So we can apply RBAC subscriptions in the level of, RBAC controls at the level of a subscription, a resource group, or a resource. So where your actual controls and therefore where your security is can be at any of those levels. Now, bear in mind that if you apply it, say, for instance, at a subscription, then that filters down into the resource group. If you apply it at the resource group, then it filters into the resources that are contained within that resource group. So, again, this is where that principle of least privilege comes in. So when you're actually doing a design, make sure that you are applying it at the level you want it to apply, not at the, not at a higher level. So for standard roles, so a couple of things within here. One is that there are 30 built-in roles, okay, that cover across like a range of individual resources within Azure and the types of resources that are available to be managed. But there are three basic roles, and these are the ones that you need to concentrate on rather than the other 27. The three basic roles are owner, contributor, and reader. Okay, so going from the top, the owner has the full access to basically be able to get access to all the resources and can delegate access to the resources that live underneath it, that live underneath the resources, and can access and can actually allocate other people to have that same right. A contributor essentially can do the same thing, but the difference is that they don't have the ability to be able to grant the owner right, and therefore the access to anyone else. And readers can just view resources. They can't modify the resources. They can only look not effectively look but not touch. You can also go and create your own custom roles. So use the built-in roles where you can, but if you need to, you certainly can. You can create custom roles. If you're creating custom roles, you can create those using PowerShell, using CLI, using REST API, and you can assign those to users, groups, or applications. And then the scope of that can go to either the subscription, resource group, or resource scopes. Okay, so all the resources. So that's the scopes you can go to, and the roles where you assign them onto. The terminology that's used within there is to grant permission is using what's called actions, and creating exclusions when you're defining it into PowerShell CLI and the REST API is using not actions. So that's the two sort of sides to it. But yeah, so you can go and create custom roles, but just bear in mind that when you create the custom role, you're adding more complexity in this. So if you can use a built-in role, use that. But certainly you can use a custom role if needed. For managing security risks by using an appropriate security solution. So the solutions that are available to manage security risks. So there is the security risk that we can do. The managing of these. There's a couple of sort of tools that are available. There's the Security Center. So the Security Center gives you the ability to prevent, detect, and respond to threats with an increased visibility into and control over the security of Azure resources. OMS is another tool, and essentially what that does is that gives you the ability to be able to do more than just simply protection, but it also does sort of some monitoring as well, and also gives you some of the ability to be able to do some reporting and alerting as well. So there's two sort of main tools that are available for managing security risks in Azure. For our application storage and data access strategy, so 5 to 10% of the exam will come from within here. The two overall topics, design of data storage, select the appropriate storage option. So for the design of data storage, the main thing that you need to make sure you're aware of within here is the different types of storage that's available and what they're going to be used for. So make sure that you are really across blob storage, table storage, queue storage, and file storage. And what circumstance you would use all of those in. So say, for instance, if I'm doing an application and I'm wanting to have an application which is going to store information, am I going to use table storage, queue storage, or file storage for that, or blob storage? And it depends on what the application is and what you're using it for, what the data is that's being transported between them. So make sure that you spend some time. It's only 5 to 10% of the exam, but it's some really easy marks for if you can get this right. So make sure you are really comfortable with the different types of storage and what you're going to be using, what you're going to use them for. For security, make sure that you're okay for Well, first off, what the difference between, say, for instance, using SQL database or Azure storage. Why would you use those? Why would you choose between the two? If you're using SQL data files and you're storing SQL data files in Azure storage, then there's some best practices that are recommended in there. So container. If you create a container in the Azure Blob Storage service, then set the access to private. Then it means that the account owner is the only person that can read it. Storing the SQL database files in storage, use a shared access signature, so that then you've actually got it's effectively a URI that gives permission to resources. It also then means that you don't have to share the storage account key into another resource in order to be able to get access. And as well as that, don't forget that you've got to do all your sort of normal on-prem security as well. So the main thing is though that make sure that you again are okay with what the different resources are that are available, how you're going to secure the access to those resources, and why you would use different technologies for that security. Choosing the appropriate storage option, and again, this is the thing you need to be really kind of comfortable with. What the difference between blob, table, queue, disk, and file storage are. Why you would use one over the other for a particular application, for a particular implementation. Selecting the appropriate storage for performance. So make sure you're okay with the workload that you're going to put into place, what that workload entails, how say for instance if it requires a large blob of storage versus high performance access, then that's going to influence which storage you're going to be using. As well as that, say for instance, how the data is being accessed. If it's being accessed as a table, if it's being accessed as individual files, that sort of thing. So, which if it's data that's going to be static mainly, then again that's going to influence the type of storage that you're going to use. Identifying the storage options for cloud services and hybrid scenarios with compute on-premise and storage, compute on-premises and storage on Azure. So in this case, this is like sort of looking at tools such as the Store Simple tools. So with on-prem compute, but with cloud storage backing it up, includes tiering. But when's that going to be appropriate? So what sort of when are you going to say, for instance, look at doing that versus doing versus having everything running into cloud services. This also, this topic may also come across into things like why you might use, what sort of functions you might use to be able to bring access from a cloud service to backend onto on-premise as well. So rather than, say for instance, you might have a cloud service of a web service that's running or a web app that's running, but then having the data storing for it being stored locally, so you don't have to retool within there. So kind of approach that from two different ways as part of your design your design approach. So for the exam, so again, basically make sure that you're okay with all the objectives. Don't wait for me necessarily on there. Make sure you're kind of looking ahead. Certainly work through the reading. There's video links that are being posted. So there's links in the video, but there's also links which are video links, so to be able to go and do some further viewing and that sort of thing. I've got a link in there as well for essentially some of the design scenarios. So kind of start looking at and it's not necessarily that these are the scenarios for the design that you're going to be given, but it's more looking at that if in a particular design or a particular scenario, like this is a design you might come up with, and the idea is like use that as a reference point, so you can then start looking and going, okay, so why would that be the case? So work backwards, like sort of like deconstruct it. If that's like if we're designing it in this way, why is it being designed in that way? And as I said, work kind of back from within there. As I said earlier, make sure you keep practicing with PowerShell. Make sure you're really comfortable with PowerShell and Azure, so that you can identify. Basically, even though it's a design exam, there is some knowledge required with regards to, say, if I'm designing up storage, how I get access to the storage. So how to copy something into Azure, because that might be part of your design implementation. Ask questions in Azure, raise questions into there, start discussions. If there's things that you're not clear of, ask questions. And I know that some people have already, and that's been awesome. And I've also noticed, really good is that people are jumping in and answering questions as well. So, kind of the best way to learn something often is to tell someone else about it. So, to try and explain it to someone else. So it's a really handy way to be able to do it. Alrighty, well, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you in the next video.